All right, saddle up, partners, because today we're riding straight into the Wild West.
To uncover the true story of Billy the Kid.
You know him, the gunslinger whose name is synonymous with outlaw legend.
Oh, was he a cold-blooded killer?
A folk hero.
Or maybe something in between.
To help us separate fact from fiction,
We're going to be digging into excerpts from an audiobook of a biography.
by Charles A. Siringo,
He was a former cowboy and detective.
who actually knew Billy the Kid.
Personal.
So let's start with the basics.
Billy the Kid, or William H. Bonney,
As he was originally known.
wasn't born on some dusty frontier ranch.
Nope.
He was actually born in New York City in 1859.
New York City.
Can you believe that?
I guess even the most notorious outlaws had surprisingly ordinary beginnings.
Right. But young Billy's life took a dramatic turn when his family moved west,
First to Kansas, then Colorado.
and finally settling in Silver City, New Mexico.
And then tragedy struck early.
His father died when he was young.
And by all accounts, he had a pretty rough relationship with his stepfather.
Siringo describes Billy as a bright kid.
Really?
Yeah, even excelling in school at one point.
Wow.
But he was also exposed to the rough and tumble underbelly of frontier life.
Gambling halls, saloons.
The constant presence of guns.
It seems like those influences really took hold.
Because at the incredibly young age of 12, he killed his first man.
12.
It happened in Fort Union, where he was staying with his mother.
Oh, wow.
He got into it with a soldier who cheated him at cards
Oh.
and ended up stabbing him to death.
Oh, man, that's heavy.
According to Siringo, Billy kept this a secret from his mother.
Who he loved dearly.
Yes, and was fiercely protective of.
Can you imagine the weight of that secret at such a young age?
It's a chilling reminder of the harsh realities of life on the frontier.
Absolutely. And this incident really set the stage for what was to come.
A few years later, when Billy was just 14, he got into another deadly altercation.
This time defending his mother's honor.
Exactly. A blacksmith in Silver City insulted her,
Oh, no.
and Billy, in a fit of rage, stabbed the man to death.
So he had to flee Silver City.
Now officially on the run from the law,
It was a pivotal moment.
the catalyst that set him on the path to becoming the infamous Billy the Kid.
He teamed up with another young outlaw who went by the name Alias,
And they started roaming the American Southwest.
getting involved in all sorts of shady dealings.
And some of those dealings were downright brutal.
Oh,
Siringo recounts what he calls the groundhog case.
the groundhog case.
Billy and Alias encountered 3 Native Americans,
Okay.
and for reasons that remain unclear, killed them and stole their possessions.
Wow, a disturbing incident that highlights the racial violence and lawlessness that permeated the Wild West.
It sure does.
It's a stark reminder that this wasn't some romanticized era of cowboys and saloons.
Right.
It was a time of brutal conflict where life was often cheap,
Especially for those deemed outsiders.
or threats to the dominant culture.
Exactly. And while we can't condone Billy's actions,
Of course.
it's important to understand them within the context of his time,
And the prevailing attitudes towards Native Americans.
which were often shaped by fear, prejudice, and the concept of manifest destiny.
After this, Billy eventually partnered up with Jesse Evans, another notorious outlaw.
Though he had known since childhood.
They ran with a gang of tough cowboys, robbing stores and stagecoaches, rustling cattle.
And even engaging in a fierce battle with Apaches.
Now that sounds intense.
Billy, according to Siringo, boasted about their victory in that battle,
Really?
claiming it was partly due to the terrifying war whoops he and Jesse Evans let loose.
As they charged into the fight.
Yeah, it paints a vivid picture of the chaos and almost theatrical nature of these encounters.
I guess even outlaws had a flair for the dramatic.
Right.
Where did their adventures take them next?
Well, the trail leads us to La Mesilla, New Mexico,
Okay.
where Billy crossed paths with some figures who would play a significant role in his life.
Okay.
Jim McDaniels, Bill Morton, and Frank Baker.
Oh, right.
It's within this group that William Bonney earned the nickname Billy the Kid.
Given to him by McDaniels.
And of course, that name would become synonymous with outlaw legend.
It's interesting how a nickname can stick and transform someone's image.
But it wasn't all just robberies and gunfights for Billy.
Really?
Siringo tells a pretty amazing story of Billy riding solo to San Elizario
Okay.
to break his friend Segura out of jail.
Wow.
It was a daring nighttime escape.
Under the cover of darkness.
He pulled it off, all for the sake of loyalty to his friend.
That's pretty incredible. It makes you wonder what kind of person risks everything for a friend like that. It seems like Billy was a complex character, capable of both great violence and incredible loyalty.
You're absolutely right, and that those conflicting aspects of his personality are going to become even more apparent as we delve into the next chapter of his life.
A Lincoln County War.
Ah, yes, the Lincoln County War.
It sounds like something straight out of a Western movie,
Imagine a classic struggle for power.
where land, cattle, and political influence were all up for grabs.
You had the powerful Murphy-Dolan faction on one side,
A group of businessmen and politicians who pretty much controlled Lincoln County.
and on the other side,
You had John Chisholm, a wealthy cattle baron, and John Tunstall.
an English rancher who challenged their authority.
So where does Billy the Kid fit into all of this?
Initially, he was aligned with the Murphy-Dolan faction.
He worked for them as a cowboy.
Dad Siringo even describes him as being a bit of a dandy,
A dandy.
dressing up in fine clothes and sporting a fancy hat.
But something shifted,
Billy became disillusioned with the Murphy-Dolan faction.
and he ended up switching allegiances to Tunstall.
That's right.
Why the sudden change of heart? Was it just about money, or was there something more to it?
Siringo suggests that Billy was drawn to Tunstall's integrity and sense of fairness.
Okay.
He saw how the Murphy-Dolan faction was exploiting the system.
And he respected Tunstall's willingness to stand up to them.
That's right. It's a fascinating insight into Billy's character.
Even though he was an outlaw, he seemed to have a strong moral compass.
You're right about that.
That's a pretty interesting twist.
So how did this decision play out?
Yeah, what happened?
Well, unfortunately, it had deadly consequences.
Uh-oh.
Tunstall was ambushed and murdered by a posse hired by the Murphy-Dolan faction,
Oh, wow.
and Billy, witnessing this act of violence, swore revenge,
This was the spark that ignited the Lincoln County War.
and Billy was thrust into the heart of a conflict that would ultimately shape his destiny.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. I'm eager to hear what happens next.
Well,
Stay tuned
for part 2,
of our deep dive into the life of Billy the Kid.
you won't want to miss it.
So we left off with Billy vowing to avenge Tunstall's death.
That sounds like a recipe for a whole lot of trouble.
It does. What happened?
Well, he joined up with this group called the Regulators,
The Regulator.
which is essentially a vigilante posse formed to go after Tunstall's killers.
Oh, wow. So they were taking the law into their own hands.
They were, and they even had this shootout
With who?
with the sheriff and his deputies.
No way.
It left several dead on both sides. The Lincoln County War was escalating quickly.
Wow. So it was a full-blown war, not just some small-town squabble.
It really was.
What a mess.
It was a clash of powerful personalities, fueled by greed, revenge, and a thirst for control.
And Billy's right in the middle of all of this.
What's fascinating is how his image starts to shift during this period.
Oh, how so?
He goes from being a relatively unknown outlaw to becoming a symbol of resistance.
Against the corrupt establishment.
Exactly.
So he's becoming a bit of a folk hero, even though he's on the wrong side of the law.
That's right. Siringo even notes that some people saw him as a sort of Robin Hood figure
Fighting for the underdog.
against the tyranny of the wealthy and powerful.
But of course, his methods were anything but heroic.
Right. He was still killing people, even if they were considered bad guys.
Yeah, it seems like a very morally ambiguous situation.
For sure, the Lincoln County War was a complex conflict with no easy answers.
And Billy was right in the thick of it.
He participated in several key battles and gunfights.
Including...
The famous 3-day Battle of Lincoln.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one. What happened?
He and the Regulators holed up in a town besieged by the Murphy-Dolan faction.
So they were trapped.
Pretty much is a chaotic and bloody affair.
Buildings were burned, people were killed.
Tensions were running high.
Did Billy make it out?
He managed to escape, but his mentor and friend, Alexander McSween,
Okay.
was killed during the fighting.
That's awful.
This was a huge blow to Billy
I bet.
and a real turning point in the war.
So what happened after the Lincoln County War? Did things settle down?
Not exactly. The war officially ended with a negotiated truce,
Okay.
but the violence continued to simmer beneath the surface.
So Billy was still a wanted man.
Oh yeah, he went back to his outlaw ways, stealing cattle and getting into scrapes with the law.
But wasn't there a love story mixed in with all this chaos? You mentioned his sweetheart.
Dulcinea del Toboso.
Yeah, her.
Ah yes, Dulcinea. She was a young woman from Fort Sumner.
Who captured Billy's heart.
That's right. Siringo doesn't go into great detail about their relationship,
That's okay.
but he does mention that she was the only woman Billy truly loved.
Really?
It seems like she had a profound impact on him.
Drawing him back to Fort Sumner,
Time and time again.
despite the risks.
Exactly.
It's interesting how even someone like Billy the Kid, who lives such a dangerous and unpredictable life, could be so devoted to someone.
Right. It shows a different side to him, a softer side that maybe contradicts his reputation as a ruthless outlaw.
So this relationship with Dulcinea would ultimately play a significant role in his downfall.
Because you see, Fort Sumner was a familiar place for Billy.
He had friends there, he felt a sense of belonging,
Exactly. But it also made him vulnerable.
more easily tracked by those who were hunting him.
That's right.
And who was hunting him? Was it still the Murphy-Dolan faction?
By this point, the Murphy-Dolan faction was less of a threat.
Okay.
The main person on Billy's trail was Pat Garrett,
Pat Garrett.
the newly elected sheriff of Lincoln County.
Okay.
Now, Garrett was a former friend of Billy's,
A former friend.
but he was also a shrewd lawman determined to bring him to justice.
Okay, so we have this former friend turned adversary on Billy's trail. Sounds like a classic Western showdown is brewing.
You could say that, and this is where things take a dramatic turn.
Tell me more.
Garrett and his posse eventually tracked Billy and his gang to a place called Stinking Springs.
Stinking Springs, what a name.
It was a freezing December night.
Oh no!
A blizzard was raging,
This sounds bad.
and they surrounded the rock house where the outlaws were holed up.
Talk about a tense situation. What happened next?
Well, one of Garrett's deputies, James H. East,
Okay.
actually wrote about this incident in a letter to Siringo years later.
So we have a first-hand account.
We do. He described how they waited outside the house for hours
Freezing and exhausted.
as the snow piled up around them.
I can't even imagine.
Just as dawn was breaking,
Yeah.
one of Billy's gang members stepped outside
Oh.
and was immediately shot dead.
Oh, wow. That's brutal. So what about Billy? Did he try to fight his way out?
They spent the whole day trying to get Billy and his remaining gang members to surrender.
So they were basically trapped. What did they do?
As the sun was setting, Billy finally signaled that he was ready to give up.
Okay.
But here's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
One of Garrett's own deputies, a man named Barney Mason,
Okay.
actually raised his gun to shoot Billy as he came out of the house.
Hold on. What? Why would he do that?
It turned out that Mason had a personal grudge against Billy from the Lincoln County War.
He wanted revenge.
He did.
Wow, talk about betrayal. What happened? Did he actually shoot him?
Luckily, no.
Thank goodness.
Two other posse members, including James East, managed to stop Mason from firing.
That's a relief.
So Billy and the rest of his gang were taken prisoner.
Where did they take them?
They were transported to Fort Sumner,
Fort Sumner.
where they spent the night under guard.
And remember, this is where Dulcinea lived. Do you think she knew what was happening?
She did. In fact, she sent a message to Pat Garrett. If she could see Billy before he was taken to Santa Fe for trial,
And Garrett allowed this.
Garrett, perhaps feeling a bit sentimental, agreed to her request.
Oh, wow. So even though Billy was a captured outlaw, he still got to see his sweetheart one last time. That's pretty incredible.
It is James East, who was one of the guards escorting Billy to Dulcinea's house,
Okay.
described it as a heartbreaking scene.
Really?
He wrote about how they embraced sharing what he called a soul kiss.
Oh.
They had to literally be torn apart. And as they were leaving, Billy, who was always a bit superstitious,
Okay.
remarked that a loose shackle on his fellow prisoner was a bad omen.
Bad omen.
He predicted that he would die and his companion would go free.
That sounds ominous. And was he right?
Chillingly, yes.
Oh, no.
The prisoners were taken to Santa Fe and put on trial.
Poor.
Billy was convicted for the murder of Sheriff Brady and sentenced to hang.
Oh, wow.
His companion, however, managed to escape and disappear.
So Billy's prophecy came true. It seems like fate was closing in on him.
It certainly does. But even though he was facing a death sentence, Billy the Kid wasn't done yet.
Really?
He had one more daring escape up his sleeve.
Wow.
One that would cement his legend in the annals of the Wild West.
Okay, now I really need to hear what happens next. So last we heard, Billy was locked up, sentenced to hang, but knowing Billy, I bet he didn't go down without a fight.
You bet he didn't. The story of Billy the Kid's escape from the Lincoln courthouse is one of the most daring in Wild West history.
Oh, I bet. Tell me more.
Okay, so he's being held upstairs, guarded by two deputies,
Okay.
Bob Ollinger and J.W. Bell.
Oh, wait.
Ollinger especially had it out for Billy.
They didn't get along.
They had this history from the Lincoln County War, and Ollinger made it clear he'd be happy to see Billy swing.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
Right. But Billy was cunning. He'd been secretly starving himself.
So he could.
Slip his hand out of his handcuffs.
Oh, wow, that's smart.
And on April 28, 1881, he made his move.
What'd he do?
He managed to get hold of Bell's gun, fatally shot him,
Oh, no.
and then tricked Ollinger,
How'd he do that?
shooting him as well when the deputy returned from a meal break.
It's almost hard to believe he killed both his guards and escaped.
He did, and not only that, Siringo writes that Billy even forced the jailer to remove his leg shackles before making his getaway.
Wow, what a bold move.
It was a truly audacious escape.
That made headlines across the country.
You got it, and solidified his place in Wild West legend.
He became a ghost again, a living legend taunting the law.
But you know the saying, you can run, but you can't hide.
Especially not from a determined lawman like Pat Garrett.
That's right, so the chase was back on.
What was Garrett's next move?
Garrett knew Billy would likely return to familiar territory.
He was right.
Billy was drawn back to Fort Sumner.
Probably to see Dulcinea.
Garrett received a tip and planned an ambush.
Okay, so the stage is set for a final showdown. This is getting intense.
It really was. On a sweltering July night in 1881, Garrett and two deputies rode into Fort Sumner.
Under the cover of darkness.
They hid their horses and went to Pete Maxwell's house,
Who's Pete Maxwell?
a wealthy rancher who knew both Garrett and Billy.
Okay, why Maxwell's house?
Garrett figured Billy might be there either seeking refuge or information.
Okay, so what happened?
Now here's where things get really interesting.
Oh, all ears.
Maxwell's bedroom door was open, so Garrett left his deputies outside and went in to question him about Billy's whereabouts.
So Garrett's in the lion's den completely unaware.
And to make things even more complicated, Billy had already slipped into Maxwell's house earlier that night.
Oh, no.
He'd been visiting someone nearby and came over to get some food.
Okay.
He was barefoot carrying a butcher knife and had no idea Garrett was there.
This sounds like a recipe for disaster.
As Billy walked toward Maxwell's room, he spotted Garrett's deputies in the shadows.
Oh.
Startled, he backed into Maxwell's room.
Wait, so Billy walks right into the room with Garrett?
It was dark, and Billy was understandably on edge. He asked, "Quines,
This means...
who is it?" in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
Maxwell, recognizing Billy's voice, whispered to Garrett, "It's him, Pat."
I can't even imagine how tense that moment must have been.
In the darkness and confusion, Garrett drew his pistol and fired.
Oh, no.
A second shot rang out, perhaps accidentally.
And Billy?
Billy the Kid fell to the floor dead at the age of 21.
Just like that, it was over. A life full of adventure, violence, and notoriety ended in a darkened room. What a tragic end to such a captivating story.
According to Siringo, people gathered outside, drawn by the commotion.
What did they do?
They took Billy's body to a nearby carpenter shop and laid him out on a workbench, surrounding him with candles.
A makeshift wake for fallen outlaw.
And the next day, they buried Billy in the old military cemetery of Fort Sumner.
Next to.
His friend Tomo Folliard, who had also been killed by Garrett's posse earlier.
And that's it, the end of the line for Billy the Kid?
Well, in a way, yes, his life was over, but his legend, that was just beginning.
It lives on.
As Siringo notes, even after his death, stories and rumors about Billy continue to circulate. People claim to have his guns, his belongings, anything associated with the infamous outlaw.
Like relics of a saint, only in this case it's an outlaw saint.
Exactly. It's a testament to the enduring power of his myth.
It really is.
There was even an attempt to erect a monument on Billy's grave,
Really?
but it failed, and the exact location of his burial was eventually lost.
So we're left with a story that's both captivating and tragic, full of contradictions and open to interpretation.
That's the legacy of Billy the Kid. He remains a fascinating figure, a symbol of the Wild West's lawlessness, a folk hero to some, a villain to others.
And through Siringo's biography, we get a glimpse into the real man behind the myth.
A complex individual capable of both great kindness and brutal violence.
It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's full of gray areas, just like the characters who inhabit it. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. Thanks for taking us on this journey through the life and times of Billy the Kid.
It's my pleasure.
And to you listening, we encourage you to dig deeper, explore the history, and form your own conclusions about the enigmatic figure that was Billy the Kid. Until next time.